It's Monday, March 26, 2012. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geeknights. Tonight, it's a tech news roundup.
Let's do this.
Because we didn't have much else to do the show on in a hurry.
Well, I figure
prep.
it's okay because we haven't done it in a long time. You know, if we did Tech News Roundup every week, then we would be Twit and not Geeknights.
But if we were Twit, do you think, I'm not saying whether or not I believe it is true, that we could give better or worse commentary than them?
It's hard. Well, I mean, the thing is, you have to put a definition of better or worse, right? Because, you know, they're more professional than we are.
That
at
is
least,
true.
You know, higher profile and such. And I'm sure most people in our geek community, you know, at least not our listeners, but obviously, you know, Twit listeners would probably say that Twit is more entertaining than we are. But we are clearly vastly more technologically knowledgeable than they are. There is no question about this. If you're looking for technological accuracy and knowledge, you definitely want to go with us nerdy guys who don't give a shit and are willing to lay down, you know, all kinds of big words. And not, you know, the people going for the more mass appeal.
Even though we haven't really done that lately.
Not so much.
Not so much.
You know, but it's like when we're talking about a tech news, though, you know, we don't, you know, it's like, you know, even if we're talking about tech news on a low level, we don't bring in, you know, something that's contradictory to technological fact. And we often do bring in the technological fact as like supporting, like, that can't be done because blah, 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 blah. You know, whereas other people always seem to fail at that. And they'll be like, oh, well, what if the something something? I'm like, that something something is not possible.
So, yeah, it's a tech news roundup, meaning it'd be kind of stupid to do some news now. So, cue up that music there. Little thing of the day music, and... how about that? It's time for Things of the Day. What do you got for me?
So check this out. You know,
checking.
Brian Kernahan of Kernahan and Ritchie, the guys who wrote the book on C, literally. He wrote a book much more recently. You can buy the Kindle edition for $10 or the paper edition for $15, or you can just read it. I think you can only read the table of contents. But anyway, I thought it was free. Whatever. But this book is still worthy of being a thing of the day. Basically, you know, this very important and smart technological person wrote a book called D is for Digital, What a Well-Informed Person Ought to Know About Computers and Communications. This book explains how today's computing and communications world operates, from hardware through software to the internet and the web. It includes enough detail that you can understand how these systems work no matter what your technical background. The social, political, and legal issues that new technology creates are discussed as well, so you can understand the difficult issues we face and appreciate the trade-offs that have to be made to resolve them. So, from the looks of it, obviously I haven't read it because I thought it was free. But anyway, I think this book is probably, you know, at least from what I've seen so far, the best book to give to a person who doesn't know about internets or anything like that, and get them to be educated. Obviously, it won't teach you programming, it won't teach you how to use a computer, it won't teach you anything like that, but it'll sort of help you understand, you know, the new laws of society in a technological world and how things work, you know, basically. I mean, let me read the table of contents. Preface, introduction, Part 1, hardware, what's in a computer, bits, bytes, representation of information inside the CPU. Part 2, software, algorithms, programming and program languages, software systems, learning to program. Part 3, communications, networking, the internet, the World Wide Web, data, information, and privacy. So that pretty much covers everything.
Huh. You know, I wonder if we could do the same concept. Remember those old The Way Things workbooks? They had the mammoths in them? Talked about nuclear power and like how records work and everything in excruciating detail for little kids.
Maybe I had different books than you.
Maybe you did. Those are really good books. I will make those the next book club book, perhaps.
Are they as good as I Want My Hat Back?
Nothing is as good as I Want My Hat Back.
I think something is.
Well,
I mean,
the monster at the end of the book.
All right, here's a question for you, right? Ready, Rim. Tomorrow on Amazon, there's 2 books. They have the same release day, right? The sequel to I Want My Hat Back.
I Want My Other Hat Back.
That's right. Or I Want My Shoe Back or something like that. And New Prince of Nothing book. Which one do you read first?
See, that's not fair because I could read.
What is not fair? I'm just saying, if it happens.
I'm just saying,
what do
I
you
could
read?
read. That's like saying, all right, there's two pieces of entertainment that may be equally compelling, one of which takes 30 seconds to consume, and one of which takes about 4 days to consume.
Which one? There has to be one that you can't be absolutely 100% equally excited for both.
But even if I were,
you have to be slightly more leaning towards one of them than the other.
In fact, even if,
All right, here's okay, I'll change.
Because I got to bust out the game theory analysis, because here's the trouble. If one of them is very quick to consume, even if it is half as good as the long book, by consuming it first, my net enjoyment over a period of time is greater.
Okay, I made a mistake in asking you which one you would go after first.
What if I only get one?
What if you only had one and the other one you could never see or experience in your life, but the other one you could read in full as many times as you please?
Prince of Nothing, because the sequel to the hat couldn't live up to what happened in the first hat. Meanwhile, Prince of Nothing, I got to know what the fuck happens.
That's right. That's right.
I really got to know.
Yeah.
Actually, now I'm thinking about that again. When does the next book come out? God damn it.
Let's check Amazon.
Anyway, so my thing of the day, not talking about ponies, but it's tangentially related. I got to make that known. Lauren Faust, who basically made My Little Pony what it is today, the internet phenomenon, also was doing another little show. As you may know, she had a hand in such great classics as the Powerpuff Girls, and she made My Little Pony what it was, and she moved on, and now she's doing a little thing for DC, the Super Best Friends Forever, and it'll be interesting. I saw, there's a clip I'm linking to, this sort of like teaser clip. She does good stuff, and I look forward to seeing more of her work in non-pony realms in the future, even though I kind of wish she'd just go back to ponies.
I wish you'd make a comic book, right? Because you look at, this really reminds me of like Tiny Titans, the comic book.
You're right.
Only a little less tiny. But it's that same sort of thing where like you take the superhero characters, you sort of, boil their characters down to like this caricature of themselves, and you sort of, make it, really expressive and cute, and you tell fun stories
well,
and,
I'm starting
and not
to
serious
realize
superhero stories.
That is what her biggest strength is. Look at all the works of hers that we like. She has characters. Like she's independent of who writes a good story, because they have different writers for a lot of these things. She takes good characters and she does good character direction and like overall like world direct, all that kind of stuff.
But anyway, there have been lots of these sorts of things in comic book form, but relatively few in TV animation form. I mean, even these are shorts, right? No one makes a whole show like this except ponies. And I really wish someone would make a whole show like this.
So start with a comic?
Yeah, so I think, maybe what she should do is she should make a comic book, because she could definitely do it all on her own, and it would be epically awesome. She could do a pony comic book. I mean,
my gosh.
I want to know why there's a strawberry shortcake piece of shit boycott all American Greetings still because of the penny arcade thing back in the day.
Hasbro being a relative...
But Hasbro does plenty of comics. It's Transformers comics.
Yeah, they do. However, they... not the best I can tell, remember, they appointed, not to make this the pony show, they hired or are trying to hire a product manager just for My Little Pony. They realize they have to, exploit it the right way, and they appear to be very carefully not wanting to fuck it up.
Yeah,
so they don't want to make the comic until they make the comic right, though there are pony comics in a ton of other languages.
Well, those are more like kids' coloring books, not comic books you buy at the comic book store.
But they still have comics in them.
They should just get Bongo or IDW to do it and whatever.
Yeah, anyway. It's not the pony show. That's coming.
That's right.
Later.
Sure.
So it's a tech news roundup, but first, the meta moment.
Did you do a thing of the day? All right, you did.
Of course I did. Not this coming weekend, but next motherfucking weekend. We're going to be in Boston for Anime Boston and the Penny Arcade Expo East 2012.
Fuck your mother.
We are doing Let's Play Money Making Game. We are doing the Geeknights Tabletop Workshop. That one is a class. We're teaching you how to play and win Carcassonne and Agricola and a secret game to be announced.
See how much time is left.
Yep. We are also going to be there with a bunch of our friends, like, Luke Crane and Jared Sorensen, who are doing a whole bunch of things, some Parsley events, the D&D panel on old D&D and why it's actually awesome.
I kind of do want to play old D&D by the book, but no one wants to play with me.
I'll play it.
And we need more people who are dedicated, will actually show up every time and prepare. And
some of those Nerd NYC people probably would.
Invest in it for reals, maybe.
Those guys love that kind of role-playing.
Maybe let's run it at recess.
Old
D&D by the book.
How old though? Because while the original
the one
boxes
that I
are good,
have that I got at Goodwill in Rochester.
because I would not mind playing
the red, green, blue.
Dungeons and Dragons, as in from the Dungeons and Dragons Cyclopedia.
The thing is, I have to read it. But yeah, the red, green, blue that I got at the Goodwill store in
But
Rochester.
levels go up to I think 36
I don't know. I have to look. I have to
in the
read book.
Cyclopedia in Dungeons and Dragons that was existing at the same time as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Anyway,
so yeah, we'll be at PAX, be at Anime Boston. Shit's going down. It's gonna be awesome. Book club book is The Hunger Games, just the first one. I know the movie came out. Read the book.
this one should be easy enough because most of you have fucking read it already.
Read the book. Movie doesn't count.
No, it doesn't.
Gotta read.
It's the book club, not the movie club.
Not a sports page, not a magazine, not
But
a
a
movie,
book.
but a book.
That's right.
So yeah, Tech News Roundup. I have most of the newses here, so I will start.
I've been reading a lot less internet lately, so I have a lot less newses. So,
all right, well, let's start
but
with...
my ability to discuss the newses has not dwindled.
Let's start
You can be
with
sure of
the
that.
National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, because they were in the news twice.
How could
recently.
they be in the news twice? Did somebody like who works there quit and like post a bunch of stuff on the internet that was scandalous?
So first,
There must be some reason.
this is kind of an aside in technology, but
Did they have a big press conference where they announced a bunch
it's
of cool
interesting that
stuff?
they had two things. The first one is that they proposed some rules to how GPS navigation systems work in cars. Specifically, they wanted to make it such that the screens cannot display your position relative to the car you're in. Like, you know, you can't angle the map down and show like the arrow that shows like, see the turn's coming up ahead. This is how it'll look like to you.
So no GTA mode, only over the top mode?
Yep. And two, they can't update in real time. They have to show you a static map.
Uh-huh.
Their argument is that this will reduce distractions and make people safer drivers. The people rely too much on GPS. And I didn't read their study fully, but I read some of the commentary. I found some counter studies that I didn't read just as much. I think this is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, you know, it's
No,
one of those things that sounds like common sense, right? That you think, oh yeah, if it updates less often, then that means you look at it less and whatever. But, you know, there's an argument to be made the other way, and I'm pretty much whatever the science says.
Well, there is an argument to be made for
If
as
you
well.
can-
Remember when we were looking to buy that house in Beacon? Remember our realtor?
Yep.
She would drive, look at literally just staring at the GPS. She wouldn't even look at the road. And apparently she'd been in like 10 car accidents in the previous few months.
Yep.
And we're riding in her car like, oh God.
So I think it pretty much just comes down to the evidence, right? If you can demonstrate, you know, within reasonable doubt or whatever, some level of confidence that these rules will decrease, you know, damage and death on the road,
So
you should put them in. But
I
if,
have a
in
counter
fact,
argument to even that.
you do not have the evidence, then do not do that. That's
I have a
pretty much
counter
all there
argument to
is.
even that.
Okay.
What if it turns out that only shitty drivers are more likely to get into accidents because they stare at the GPS?
Mm-hmm.
And good drivers, because the orientation and real-time updates of the map are so accurate and from the perspective of the user, you could argue that someone who glances at it quickly and then resumes looking at the road is much more likely to be able to parse the information and then resume looking at the road if it's contextual and in real time. If it's just a static map, how many times have you been driving
Right. But again, right,
in the days before any of this, you know, any sort of navigation device, and you had a map like printed out, you're trying to like hold it in front of you while you're driving. That shit is dangerous.
Right, but I mean, again, this is just your common sense as opposed to someone else's common sense. You know, if you can provide evidence to suggest that that is true within some high level of confidence, then what we need, obviously, is some sort of rule that says, oh, well, if you're this kind of driver, then you can use this, but if you're not, you can use that. So, you know.
But how do you legislate that? And more importantly, this is all crazy anyway, because phones have the real-time GPS and will never be regulated in that regard. So anyone who wants to use GPS navigation, if a law were passed to basically ruin in-car GPS, they would just mount their phone on their dashboard.
But then they'll just say, you know, any GPS software.
There's no way that would fly. I mean, does that count? All right, GPS software on my laptop computer.
Yeah.
What about my boat navigation?
That's, you know,
there's
you're
no
gonna
way.
bring your boat your boat navigation isn't gonna have the road data, you know, so you can't bring it in your car. It won't help you.
Yeah, but what if I just overlay a map? The thing is, there's no way a law could be passed that would ban GPS navigation systems updated in real time. Because what constitutes a GPS navigation system?
Well, I think the fundamental thing here, right, is that, remember, this is a regulation of software. It's impossible to regulate software. You cannot make a law that says software that does X may not exist or may not be sold or may not be used. Because
so they can in this case.
Someone can always make software that does X and distribute it, and there's no way you can stop it.
So the way they would do that in this case is they would regulate that the ones that are built to be mounted in cars, like the in-car, like the ones that come with cars, would be subject to this. And unless you're an Uber hacker who knows how to, root it and fuck with it, you couldn't load software on it because it's a walled garden. Not even a walled garden. You're walled out of the garden. You're not even walled in.
The question is, right, if, basically car GPSs like that, like those specific car devices were gimped in this way, would that hurt their sales?
Oh, I think it would destroy their sales, meaning they're going to lobby against this and it won't happen.
Right, so basically they're going to make a law that basically puts those companies out of business if it's enforced, and just everyone gets smartphones, or in fact that could actually be beneficial, because then a lot of people who don't have smartphones and now can't get a GPS that does that will end up having to get a crappier GPS. I don't know. We don't know.
Yep, to quote, every current installed navigation system uses the car as a fixed point and shows the map moving around it. The NHTSA wants that changed so as to keep the map fixed.
Well, there'll be like some black market for old bootleg, some old GPS devices that still do it this way.
I think there would be. Now, I would argue, obviously, I agree with you that we would have to do some real studies, but I would argue that my guess as to where this legislation is coming from is that people are, they want to do something about distracted driving, and we know it's a real problem.
Definitely.
And they can't easily legislate against things like eating an apple. I mean, look how much trouble they had even trying to make the phone talking stuff, despite the fact that the evidence shows that talking on any phone, hands-free or not, has equal damage to your ability to navigate safely. But most of the commentary I see on this is people saying, yeah, you shouldn't even use a GPS, just read a map. But I have seen studies saying that the safest way to navigate in unfamiliar terrain,
road signs,
actually is GPS. But that's assuming you have situational awareness of the road signs and such.
Yeah.
But for example, imagine if you have to take a detour and, you memorized your route. You printed some MapQuest. You looked at maps along the way. But you didn't memorize, Bumblefuck Town next to the highway halfway along your route. You can't memorize every map in the world. So what's safer? Trying to look at a map while you're driving?
Trying to hit your phone and tell it to reroute, or the GPS that automatically reroutes.
Exactly. So I think this whole thing's silly and driven probably, I'm going to stereotype here, by old people who are mad about GPSs.
Who knows?
But the NHTSA was in the news again because they said something interesting. They said that every driver's ed in America teaches bullshit way to drive.
That might be true.
The specific one they say is that putting your hands at 10 and 2, which is what everyone says you should do, which actually I was taught in real driving school specifically not to do, is a terrible way to drive.
It doesn't really matter.
Yes, it does.
Does it matter that much?
Yes,
where
it
you
does.
Put your hands?
Scott, have you ever heard of push-pull? There's a bunch of different, sort of techniques to turning. Push-pull is when you put your hands lower, and when you want to turn right, instead of, kind of pulling with your left hand, over the top, your hand is lower, and you push up with the right hand, and you have a lot more maneuvering and movement of the wheel before the other hand has to take over.
I never really thought about how
And think about it. You probably hand over hand it when you're turning quickly.
I don't know how. I'm just trying to imagine doing it, but I can't, because it's imagining it versus, is not, and because I'm consciously thinking about it, I'm not sure how I do it when it's just a motor reflex and I'm not, doing it subconsciously.
Well, I guess the driving instruction I got, because I learned a little bit from some police and from some other people that were interesting as opposed to just driver's ed. They talked a lot about when to do hand over hand and where to put your hands and how if you put your hands lower, all that stuff. And basically, the reason they're bringing this up isn't the control factor, though I've seen many studies talking about how it's better to put your hands in different positions.
Yep.
But it's that airbags will break your arms if you're a 10 and 2.
Oh, that is true.
Or that your hands will be knocked off of the wheel and you won't be able to control the car as easily.
That's also true. Didn't think about that, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah, I didn't think about that at all. I saw the article and I was thinking all about like technique.
One thing I always
driving,
wondered, right?
And then there were like airbags. I'm like, oh.
One thing I always wondered, right, is like you look and it's like every car has a circle steering wheel, right? But you look at like F1 cars and they sort of have this rectangular steering wheel with handles on the side. Also,
think about the wheel play of how far do they have to hand over hand that thing?
No. This is the thing that I'm getting to, right? In an F1 car, if you turn it like basically like, 90 degrees to the left, that's all the way left. And 90 degrees to the right, that's all the way right. You don't turn it around more than one,
So Scott, the reasons
why
for that...
why are the steering wheels in cars so unsensitive
Scott,
that you have to turn them so much?
Because
we could easily change
Scott,
it.
no, we can't.
Why
There's
not?
a lot of the faster you're going, the more effect the slight angle of the wheel has on your vector.
Mm-hmm.
So an F1 car is going so fast that you need the ultra sensitive one because the tiniest little will put the car crazily in a different direction. So, and also they're driving in a very different kind of environment. The wheels are different. Almost everything about those cars is different. Normal cars have to drive at both 5 to 10 miles an hour, parking lots, maneuvering around, and 80, 90 miles an hour on the freeway. You need a wheel ratio that fits all of those situations. And don't say dynamic because there's no safe and cost-effective way to do that in current cars.
Your steering is power controlled anyway. It's drive by wire. You're not right. Unless your power steering fails and you have to use like rack and pinion.
All right, Scott.
Or
I'll use a simpler argument rather than trying to get into the details of it. Would you trust the average person on the road if they had an extremely sensitive steering wheel?
They're already not trustworthy on the road. So what difference does it make?
I would argue it would probably make them worse.
At least it should be customizable.
Also, power steering can fail.
It does.
And having
your car, it has failed in your car.
Yes, and having the rolly means you can still leverage the wheel and bring yourself to a stop.
That's true.
There are a lot of reasons why we use the circle. I mean, some people say we should use the
But then again,
joystick.
even if you have the ultra-sensitive steering wheel, if it fails, it could unlock, and then you could spin it around a whole bunch of times.
Yeah, do you really want normal people driving cars to have a wheel sensitivity that changes on them all of a sudden?
Well, I mean, it's if it feels natural, you won't even realize it, right? You'll just sort of, know. Like people won't even realize their wheel sensitivity is changing, even though it is, if it's done properly.
Unless it changes in an emergency situation like that, and they never run into emergency situations.
Well, I mean, if the power steering is out, the car would be like, holy fuck, your steering is broken now.
It's all moot. You know why we don't need to change? Because robot cars will be here before we could train people to use something other than the current wheel.
Yeah, I hope so.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
I just thought it was interesting that the NHTSA came in on two things, and I agree with one and disagree with one, and I don't know, the bunch of stuff, it's synchronicity.
Anyway, so here's pretty much the biggest tech-ish story that there is, period, going around the internets these days, and that's the Facebook password deal, right?
Not the mega upload thing, which is still pretty big news.
Well, that's a little older story, but it's it's still going. This is the big one right now, at least. It's definitely the higher headline on Google News.
This has been going on. This isn't a new thing.
So
I mean, there have been stories about this for like the last 4 years.
Right. Well, the deal is that for months and for quite a while, right, companies and schools and all kinds of various people, right, have been sort of asking and or forcing and or coercing potential employees, current employees, students, whoever, someone in subservient positions, or disadvantaged bargaining positions to give up, Facebook passwords, email passwords, or to log into accounts and let people, teachers, administrators, bosses, potential bosses look
we're not
at their private information.
We're not talking about tell me what your Facebook account ID is. I have things to say about that too, but that's not this problem.
Right. And then, look at those things before deciding to hire, suspend, all kinds of things, right? Schools, jobs, all kinds of places, not just school. Those are just the only ones I can think of right now. And the reason this is news, because it's been ongoing, is that Facebook came out and they're going to try to fight this shit, which is like, fuck yeah, Facebook, you go for it.
Yep.
Right? Because it's really, like, no matter how much we tell people, right? And I can't reiterate this enough. Under no circumstances, none whatsoever, should you ever tell any other human being on the planet Earth, past, present, future, living, or dead, your password to anything, not even your spouse, not even your own mother.
I'm going to qualify that with some exceptions.
Not even anything.
Scott,
ever.
exception 1, old systems where there isn't the concept of users. There is a password.
Well, okay, that isn't your password then, is it?
Ah, okay. So you, as long as, because there's
and secondly, upgrade that shit fast.
Yes, but
that should be priority uno.
There are things like a shared account for specific purposes that can make sense, though there are usually better ways to go about it. Not every system allows for that. But if it's your personal thing, that is like basically email, Facebook, like your /dot account, anything like that, never, ever.
Right, and you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. You might be thinking, wait, there must be a crazy situation where you have to. For example, Rim, I die. I'm the only one with the password to like the Geeknights web server. I need to fix that shit.
So your password should be in escrow with the lawyer.
No, that's not even necessary. Because I'm dead, you and the lawyers can go to Linode and you can get the account reset and transferred over to you. Because when you inherit the things that belong to me, you inherit the accounts
Scott,
that belong to me.
What if, for example, I use Windows encryption, so my account is encrypted, and unless you actually know the password, there is no way to get the data.
This is why you have some sort of thing in a safe deposit box so that
yes,
someone can inherit it.
It's called escrow.
But that's not telling it to anyone. That's putting it in a safe deposit box with a key, and then someone can inherit that key when you are dead.
Yep, at best. The
same as the keys to your house.
Even if you tell it to someone, that would be a situation where you give it in confidence to, for example, an escrow company, and there's a reason why you can't encrypt it.
There's no reason to tell it to a person, though. You could just put it on a piece of paper in a safe box that no one looks at but you.
Anyway, the sheer idea that anyone would ask you for something so blatant, even edge cases aside, for your Facebook password.
Right, and the thing is, even someone who is smart enough to know this rule, because that you should never tell it to anyone ever, even a smart person who knows that, and I'm sure most of the listeners already are smart enough to know that, there are situations where you could be disadvantaged, and sort of, be coerced or forced into giving it up. If I'm desperate for a job and I can't even eat, and some guy says, hey, if you want this job, it's the only job you can get, fucker. Let me look at your Facebook to make sure that, you're kosher. Even though it's bad, you might be willing to do it anyway.
Yep, and the thing is, that's why we need someone like Facebook to
You didn't
fight.
even get socially engineered, right? You just got socially owned, which is not fair.
Yep, so we need someone big, a juggernaut with money, to take this to court and fight it, because they'll win. They'll win so hard for reasons I don't really want to bother getting into. But, but one thing I could say is that I have asked that question before, occasionally when I've interviewed people, because if they agree,
then
I stop them.
Obviously no, and you never hire them.
Yeah, I would. That's basically a deal breaker. Anyone who would give me their password,
I see no
not safe.
I see no problem with the actual asking, right? If you want to ask someone for their password...
Well, no, because actually the laws will probably say that you cannot even ask. Because you can't even ask, for example, what someone's gender identity is. You can't ask them how old they are.
That's different. That's only in a job situation. But
yes, the job situation.
But I mean, I'm just saying, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking someone,
hey, Scott, here's why.
Hey, Rim, do you want to tell me your password?
So, Scott, if I am interviewing you for a job and I ask you that, it could be a problem. You want to know why? Your Facebook account may well have information about you that I'm not allowed to ask about, like religion, race,
of course,
gender, sexual orientation.
But I'm saying... if you actually were to look at the Facebook account with that password, then I think it'd be a problem.
Most of the laws are geared around asking the question or asking for access.
But I'm talking about morality. I don't care about, the laws are crazy, whatever. I'm not a lawyer. But I'm saying I don't think, personally, I don't feel there's anything wrong with asking the question. I feel if you answer it truthfully, you're dumb. And 2, you shouldn't look, and you should just say, yeah, I'm not hiring you because obviously you're a security threat to this company.
Well, the important thing is that Facebook is fighting this because non-technologists, especially people who are also in a desperate economic situation, are pretty much fucked and would have to give up whatever the person asks. So we need someone to fight for them, and I guess Facebook's the only one who's willing to.
Facebook says it could take legal action, but it has no immediate plans to sue any specific employer. So I think basically this is the ultimatum, which is like, hey, stop doing it, or we're gonna, we could come after you. And you'll see I'm sure if there's someone who is like a huge, continuous, flagrant violator will be targeted by the lawyers to bring the smack down to set an example if this wasn't enough.
So Japan, they don't really have free speech in Japan, but Japan did the thing that everyone tries to do with Google.
It's not as free as it is here.
Well, yeah, most places aren't.
Yeah.
But they did the thing that a lot of people try to do, and I don't want to talk about the details of this. I want to talk about a kind of a more fundamental problem here. So the Japanese court ordered Google to disable autocomplete for its search engine.
Just for everybody, period?
Yep. Or
turn
at least,
off all the autocompletes.
Or at least everyone in Japan.
So just turn off all autocompletes everywhere.
Yep. And now it's not like this was a pending. This was the court straight up ordered it. Google said, fuck you.
Yeah, of course.
But basically, the reason is that someone in Japan filed suit saying that if you type his name into autocomplete, most of the suggestions are associated with criminal behavior because apparently there's someone with the same name as him who was a criminal.
All right. There's a lot of people named Scott Rubin. If you type in Scott Rubin and it starts to autocomplete, let's see what happens. I don't even know.
So that's old news. Google.
It says producer, filmography, Willow Creek, Facebook. So, I'm not a producer, right? This is bullshit. This is false advertising, right? I'm suing you.
See, that's what I want to talk about. The fact that Google said no and that Japan tried this crap and the people don't understand technology, it's old news. The interesting part here is that the common theme in a lot of these problems isn't even people trying to hide information about themselves, though that may be the case here. But how can we live in a world where any human being would do a Google search for someone, maybe because they're hiring them or whatever, look at the first hit they see, and blindly assume that is, in fact, John Smith, the serial rapist,
right?
As opposed to John Smith, the guy who applied for a job. Like, in what world is that actually a problem? And apparently this one.
Yeah. There was a great, what was it? Hold on. I hope it's still there. Yeah, here it is. The top link on Reddit as we speak says, the title of it is Samuel Clemens Dropping the Knowledge. And as you know, that's Mark Twain, right? So it says right here, this is the quote, censorship is telling a man he can't have a steak just because a baby can't chew it. And that is so appropriate to this.
That's one of my favorite. Okay, so if I type Rim, I get of Bedford.
How about the underwear brand? Is it still around?
No, well, it is, but the autocomplete is Rim of Bedford.
Okay.
Which is in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Bed-Stuy.
Oh, there's also Rim Incorporated. That's the underwear, I think.
Yep.
All right. What do they make? Trying to figure this out.
So just because a baby can't tell the difference between Rim the podcaster and the clock setter and Rim the underwear company doesn't mean that we smart people should not be able to have our stake of Google autocomplete just because babies can't chew it. And that is censorship, which is all over in Japan. Japan censors the porn. They put the mosaics over it. They censor political speech. There's actually rules about, how many flyers you can send out during elections and stuff like that.
Yep. Now, that's a complicated issue because...
Obviously. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it is censorship, and they have it in many areas.
Yep.
There were recent talks about those laws censoring various mangas or animes in Tokyo that were threatening and such. They have all kinds of stuff that is censoring over there. And... in most countries in the world, right? Japan is not alone. They're just a little more sensory than us and a little less sensory than China. It's just how it goes.
So you have another news? Or you want me to keep going?
I pretty much don't have news, but I can look for one.
All right. So an MIT professor, this is an interesting article, basically made a very lofty statement, a Y plus 50, which we know Y plus 30 is impossible. So yeah. I can't imagine a Y plus 50. He argues that it is possible that within 50 years, we as humans can literally end disability in any practical sense.
I don't know if I believe that. I mean, I see where he's going, right? Because we have managed to counter, even today, a lot of disabilities, right? Some blind people, depending on the cause of blindness, can be made to see again with things like eye donations or, implanting like cameras into your body that are wired into your nerves or brain. People can see like that with low resolution. We've got all sorts of, ear implants to fix some forms of hearing loss. So you can hear again with
cochlear implants are where you see the first. It's more. I think social problems are going to be a much bigger drain on this being reality than a technological problem, because the reason he made
there are people who've lost limbs, obviously.
Now, the reason he believes this is actually kind of sad, but also hopeful that the 2 wars America started recently brought back a huge number of severely disabled people. And this has caused...
But only certain kinds of disabilities, though.
But this has caused a huge explosion in the prosthetics industry and prosthetics research. And actually, it's been kind of quietly advancing for the past decade to a degree that is almost ludicrous. And he has all these examples of basically most of the prosthetics that are advanced today that we're seeing like on TV, like the runners and the climbers and everything, didn't exist until very recently and are progressing very rapidly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're only talking about that kind of disability, the missing limb sort of disability, then I actually probably agree with him that in 50 years, if you have that kind of disability and you can afford it, that you will be able to basically not only, have some sort of replacement part that is basically equivalent to the lost part, or perhaps even better. Although, while it may, be equivalent motor function, you can walk, you can pick things up, you can do all those things. I don't know if we'll actually be able to restore full feeling.
Yeah, probably not in 50 years.
So, maybe in 50 years there definitely will be some amount of feeling restoration, but that's a very narrow category of disability, right?
True, but
what if we
expand this a little bit? I mean, we're already at the point where there are a lot of severe genetic disorders or congenital disorders that can be detected in the womb. So what if a combination...
are you talking about not having those babies?
Yeah, what if a combination of genetic testing and abortion and, things like that, and also treatments, genetic treatments, we're able to eliminate maybe not 100% of disability, but what if we get to the point to where we look back at a wheelchair and that's this kind of archaic, old barbaric way people had to get around before we had cyber limbs.
Because we're rich people living in the fancy country, right? It's not going to be true for the whole world.
Not at first.
Not
nothing
in 50
is.
years, that for sure.
Yeah,
right?
not at first.
So, definitely among a class of people who, does that and is willing to do that and wants to do that, right? And, does, test and not have babies that have disabilities, there's going to be a lot less of that particular kind of disability. But there are still, even then, there are still lots of disabilities that come about that we still don't see them coming, and there's not much we can do about them. Like Stephen Hawking, right? Are you going to fix Stephen Hawking in 50 years? I don't think so.
Maybe. Actually,
I would like to see.
We're making surprising strides in a lot of neurodegenerative disorders and things like that.
If I don't see 50 years, right?
50 years in current science is a long time.
It is a long time, but I don't see
I do agree
100% He's talking 100% fixing no disability.
Yeah, no, Scott,
that's the stretch.
Scott, I think he's being a little bit exaggerative on purpose.
Yeah, no kidding.
But also, I think for people who can afford them, and at least, for the industrialized world, I think within 50 years there will be a great decrease in the occurrences of any sort of visible disability in people.
I would say that plus, I guess also I just want to toss this aside in there, right? There are things that technically, legally count as disability, but aren't disability. Like if you're pregnant, you can get disability payment, whatever. Anyway.
Oh, we won't have babies in 50 years.
Yeah, right. But I think that is definitely true, right? That there has been and continues to be a huge increase in our, technological ability to assist or mitigate disabilities of a wide array, and that the trend is clearly going upwards and will not cease. And with such a long runway, there will be a ginormous amount of progress in that area.
Now, what I do wonder is that look at the huge controversy in the deaf community over cochlear implants, even though more and more youth don't see a controversy at all and think the whole thing's ridiculous. But I wonder if we'll see the same thing with the wheelchair. I wonder if there will be people who will argue that we should keep the wheelchair even if we have in every way better solution.
Well, what do you do in a situation, right? This brings in all sorts of other questions, right? Like, okay, we can repair legs and make them awesome, right? Just like we have the perfect leg replacements, robot leg.
Yep.
Okay. So who uses wheelchairs because they can't walk? A lot of people. Some people because they lost a leg. Okay, obviously you lose a leg, you get a robot leg. No one's really going to argue with that, right? What if I never had a leg? Okay, well, maybe robot leg, maybe no one's really going to complain about that, right?
Yeah, I see where you're going.
What if I'm an old lady or an old dude and my leg is just all weak Should I go get her? And I'm using a wheelchair because I just have weak ass legs. I'm 90 years old. Should I go get robot leg?
That is a personal choice, and I think once again that independent of all other factors, the biggest thing that will hold this back in the next 50 years will just be people's hesitance to give up their humanity, and or people's hesitance to experience invasive surgery, and also there will be physical things.
What
like,
if there's nothing wrong with my leg? I just want to win the running race against Usain Bolt, and I go. And, but then there's some law that says, you can only get robot leg if you lost your leg, quote, legitimately.
But then there will be a rise in, oops, I got run over by a car.
Oops.
Just on my legs.
I fucked around with the mafia on purpose.
Somehow I don't think the mafia would leave you in a position to get a robot leg.
I'm just saying.
Unless you were assuming the breaking the
knees. No, thing is, they don't know is that I'm still with the mafia. They're gonna bet on me in the robot leg race, right? They run over my legs. Then I got robot leg. Then they spent we spend mob money to get the even better robot leg.
We're getting into Ghost in the Shell.
And now we're going into the robot race, and the mafia's betting on me in the robot race.
I think in 50 years we're gonna see. Maybe 100, I'll say this, within 100 years.
I'm like the boxer who throws all the fights.
I think we're going to have a surprising an analog to the Ghost in the Shell world, where the ultra-rich who need it actually have completely prosthetic bodies.
And pretty much any good sci-fi, you're going to find some analog in the real world. That's just how it works. Oh, gee, we're living in the Brave New World. Yep. Oh, we're living in the 1984. Yep. We're living in this Ghost in the Shell.
No. I think Ghost in the Shell is more predictive of our current social trends than a lot of other science fiction.
Well, obviously, if you just take all the science fiction there ever was, sure. But I'm talking about the good stuff, the stuff that's relevant, that people know and keep bringing up.
Yeah.
You know why the people know it and keep bringing it up? Because it partially came true and is coming more true every day.
I was going to make a second suggestion.
It's the other way around, right?
That those people are still in college.
That's right. But it's, this is what you don't realize. It's the other way around. Why? It's like, oh, the good stuff comes true. It's like, no, it's not. It's, it is the good stuff because it already is or has or is coming true.
Or it's an idea that's so either disturbing or pervasive or appealing that people are
Even the last question's coming true.
That society is guided toward it. I mean, how much of our scientific advancement has mirrored science fiction, partly because people are inspired by science fiction.
Yeah.
At what point is our society a feedback loop?
Even they're made of meat is coming true.
Is it?
Yeah.
We are made of meat.
I know.
We haven't. We've
it was
always
true to
been
begin
made of
with.
meat.
That's why
it's not
popular.
coming true. In fact, it's becoming less true. We're replacing our meat with non-meat. The opposite is happening.
I know, but that's the whole story. You don't get it. Yeah. We're the visiting guys.
Yeah.
And
not
we
yet.
Forgot that we used to be made of meat.
Not yet. There's no one to visit.
It's gonna happen.
Maybe there will be.
It's coming.
It's coming. But for example, 1984 only came to pass in North Korea.
Hey, it just is it for someone. That's the most relevant book there is.
True. Anyway, you got a news, or I got to keep going?
Yeah, I pretty much didn't find any tech news because, like I said, I'm not reading that much internet. How much longer do you want to even go here?
Let's do one more. I don't want to. I'll skip the Interpol thing. Let's talk about Mega Upload because I got a lot to say about that.
Okay.
No, not the court case, not piracy. We're not going to have any of the arguments that anyone else has had. There's a problem.
The same argument we've been having for 15 years.
Did not anticipate. So Mega Upload paid for hosting.
Yep.
Someone hosted all that data.
Yep. Well, they hosted it in quite a few places.
Mega Upload can't make any more money because of court injunctions and the fact that their access to those files is shut down.
The site's down. Yeah.
Law enforcement wants access to that data. So do all of the legitimate customers of the company. The people who are hosting the data don't want to host it for free and shouldn't have to. If Mega Upload weren't under any sort of legal injunction and they just, stop paying, that ISP would probably just delete their goddamn data. But now we're in a situation where whose obligation is it to pay the hosting company to continue to host Mega Upload's data until the court case is sorted out, because there are legitimate customers who have a legitimate claim to that data.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the answer is, other than that I feel like the prosecution, which in this case may or may not be involving the government, or maybe the government or the courts should pay it for the time being. And then whoever loses the case may or may not have to pay it in the end.
Well, I just wonder what normally happens in these situations, right? Like, what if, the government, comes and, I have a small business and the government, shuts me down, but I'm innocent until proven guilty, right? But there's a court injunction that shuts me down, right? So what normally happens, how do I pay my electric bill in that? Who pays my electric bill in that situation, right? Do I have to pay it from my savings? Obviously if I win the case, do I get the money back? And then what if that was all my money and I get my electricity shut off, do I just have to, I'm pretty much just fucked until get proven innocent and then get, some sort of compensation. There are a lot of, I just read a story about a guy who was wrongfully in jail for a long fucking time. And just because he was in Washington state, he didn't get shit. He just got set free and that was it. Where if he was in another state, he would have gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I feel like in cases like this, it's one of those situations where there is no good answer. And whenever there's no good answer, there's a government answer.
Right, and it's like...
I think the government should front this money out of tax dollars because there's no better option.
That's right, and it's like you can't...
Because now here's a secondary argument.
And your thing is, you're not just punishing the dude, right? Innocent until proven guilty, whatever. He has customers that you're punishing. What if I was a dry cleaner and I had all these clothes in there, but you shut my ass down? Now, what about all these people who own those fucking clothes?
Yeah, I wasn't laundering money through the dry cleaner. I dropped off an $800 suit to be dry cleaned.
And now you can't get it. Right? Because you can, and it's like, because they, I didn't pay rent and the building is closed and the landlord refuses to open it. So now you got to sue the landlord, which means does we have to sue the hosting company to get the files off Mega Upload? But the government's forcing them to do it. It's like, it's a really, really bad situation.
Now, I feel like, I don't know if this would come to pass, but if the government in this case, just this particular case, were forced to guarantee the bill for as long as the data had to be held there, the government would have a sudden big incentive to sort this shit out quickly. And resolve
Nothing is
everything.
sorted out quickly. Court shit takes multiple years.
I know,
it's so
but
fucked up.
Maybe we could make an incentive structure where the government, in the very least, wants to make the data available for some grace period to let everybody download whatever they've got up there that they need, and then shut it down.
This is one of those situations where I think you just need a judge to come in quickly and fix this thing, that is clearly holding everything up, right?
Yep.
There's this huge limbo. You need some smart judge to be like, all right, look, this is what we gonna do, right? We're gonna put all these servers online in download only mode for, this period of time, or we're gonna make some sort of thing where we go through all the legitimate accounts and we mail everyone, a disc with their files on it, or whatever, and then that's it. You just need something. But the thing is, there's evidence in there, right? So,
but you don't lose the evidence.
Who's supposed to pay for the taking of the care of the evidence?
But in this case, in the very least, you don't lose the evidence if you let everyone download their stuff. And that at least reduces the total harm
No, but you
of the
still have
court
to
action.
keep those servers around. The company the hosting company is getting fucked here.
But if you let everyone download their stuff, it reduces the total harm as the result of the court action. Because all the legitimate customers can get their data and they're no longer involved. It reduces the problem because now if they do decide to delete the data or the police have to pay for it or whatever, they don't have to consider the feelings of all the people who were fucked by, the externalities of the situation because they got their data. They're fine.
I think that's something else, right? The problem is this hosting company, right? And it's like, well, this stuff is evidence and that's why they're supposed to keep it, but where does evidence usually go? Usually it's confiscated and
but Scott,
brought to an evidence place,
what
like an evidence locker.
Say there was a murder in our apartment, like a hobo broke in, and then another hobo broke in, there was a murder.
Okay.
So the government, the police block off my apartment and they investigate it for like a month and I can't come in. Do I get compensated?
I don't know. What does? Ask a lawyer. What happens?
I don't know.
I have no idea what happens.
So, but the problem is, at least those cases are
You know who covers
small.
that? Your insurance.
Yep. Here's the problem. Here's why this is an interesting story. With these massive...
I wonder if there's any insurance companies involved in this.
With these massive technology situations, a massive court action that shuts down a server used by millions of people, it's as though a murder happens in an apartment building and we block off the entire city block. The scale is so great that we can't just treat this the same way we treat similar situations because far too many people are affected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean... Already, if there's a death on the freeway, we shut the freeway down for like an hour or so and cause huge problems for everyone else while we sort it out. Imagine if we shut the freeway down for a month. Or we shut all the freeways down in an entire state because there was one deadly accident anywhere in the state.
I mean, usually this stuff doesn't get, cause a huge ruckus because, oh no, we blocked off one dude's apartment. Well, sucks for that one dude.
But that guy has insurance. Maybe the judge is sympathetic and he makes an agreement.
My dry cleaner example, one dude. This is thousands upon thousands of people, getting held up, and the hosting company getting held up big time. So this is like this isn't something that happens
That's why
too
the
often.
hosting company is the one that filed an emergency motion. They're the ones that said, look,
it's an emergency motion. How can the judge? It doesn't seem too much of an emergency. The judge still hasn't done shit. It's an emergency.
Are on the
You're
hook
supposed to go take care of it.
You want us to keep this data for your evidence, and we want to do the right thing and not delete, all these customers' data. We just want to guarantee that someone's going to pay for this.
Yeah. $9,000 a day, I heard.
That's actually not that much money in the scale of hosting that we're talking about.
And it's like, I can't think of any real, straight up, all the straight up answers seem wrong. Like, should Mega Upload have to pay? No, not unless you let them restart their business. Should the hosting company have to pay? No. If someone doesn't pay their bill, the hosting company shuts them their asses off.
Should the individual users have to do some sort of class action? No, that's BS.
That's also bullshit,
the
right?
The bureaucracy alone
would be... And should the
would
government have to pay? Well, no. Why should the government pay a huge pile of money?
There is an argument that the government should pay because...
There is some, but it's all, at the other hand, no.
Yeah, but
also, yes.
One function of government is that it deals with the things that private enterprise, the free market, individual people, and society as a whole cannot deal with.
But that's a huge cost for society to bear, especially if it turns out that they actually are guilty and that in the end they do shut down the servers because it's like, oh, we had to pay to keep these fucking servers up.
That's why I think we need two situations. One, the government should pay, but two, the government should have a huge incentive to reduce the stakeholder, the breadth of stakeholders in the situation as much as possible. The government should pay for the hosting. The judge should mandate that the company and Mega Upload allow read-only access to all the files to all their users, even if people download infringing things. Who cares? For like 30 days.
Cares.
He shouldn't, because the infringing stuff is already the court case. If another 5 people download an MP3, that damage is far less than the millions of people with legit files.
But then, right, now the RAMPAs will sue the judge and the court.
Now, I think that this is a case where the judge should have the authority to tell them to go fuck themselves. They've already got a pretty solid case.
That would be nice.
They're going to win the case anyway.
I don't know if they're going to win it, actually.
Well,
I think it's like 75-25, right? It's like normally I would say 50-50 just based on, whatever.
Well, I have a complicated opinion. My personal goal...
But corruption goes into there.
My personal goal is that even though, Mega Upload was pretty much just like the worst piracy.
But if you look at his case, he's actually working pretty... He's fighting it like the true fight, and he's got a lot of stuff on his side.
I hate the RIAA more than I hate most organizations in the world. And it's to the point to where I really just want to see him go down, even though I don't want it to be just a straight-up copyright free-for-all. I still want there to be a music industry. I want all these things to happen. I want a reasonable answer. The RIAA has excluded all reasonable answers, and I'll let a lot of things burn down if they get burned down with it. And I think we're done.
Yeah.
Tech News Roundup.
Great.
This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geeknights is not 1, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.